Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. We have a very special Thanksgiving week episode for you all today. In the first part, I'll be interviewing our dear friend and IPF's very own Chief Policy Officer, Michael Koplow, about the latest news on the Israel and U.S.-Israel front, including the uptick in Israeli military action in Lebanon, including a high-profile assassination in Beirut this past weekend, the state of play of the Gaza ceasefire, and a post-mortem of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's trip last week to visit President Donald Trump at the White House. That's all in the first part of the show. In the second part of the show, my other colleague, Shanie Reichman, the head of strategic initiatives at IPF and director of the Atid Young Professionals Network, will be interviewing Matan Sivek, who is the co-founder of the Washington chapter of the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, which is, of course, the organization that represented the hostages and did so much tremendous work these past 2 years to raise awareness, to lobby, and to ultimately get them all back, or almost all back, from captivity in Gaza. So that'll be in part 2. With all that said, let's get into it, and let's get to Michael Koplow. Hi, Michael. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Neri. When was the last time you and I did a podcast, the two of us, without Shira?
Never. I want to venture to say never. It's nothing against Shira. This is an emergency Koplow enlistment, but yes, nothing against Shira or anyone else that was supposed to be on this week. But it's great to see you, and thank you for coming in on such short notice. But you are also a useful guest, because I wanted to talk about.
glad to hear it.
The faintest of praise? No, it's the highest of praise. Because I wanted to talk about several current event issues right ahead of Thanksgiving, basically to check in on what's happening on the various still active fronts here in Israel, and also gauge the mood back in your neck of the woods in Washington about everything happening there and here. So basically, I wanted to start by talking about Lebanon. Pretty much very in the news in recent days after Sunday's fairly dramatic assassination, an airstrike in Beirut that killed a top Hezbollah military commander, what Israel said was the group's chief of staff, Haitem Ali Tabatabai. I hope I got that name right. But obviously Israel has been striking all across Lebanon, especially southern Lebanon, eastern Lebanon, for the past year, ever since the U.S. brokered ceasefire came into effect pretty much exactly almost a year ago. So I wanted to get your sense, Michael. Obviously, the Israeli point of view about the strikes and especially the assassination is, well, we want Hezbollah to disarm as per the terms of the ceasefire deal, and we want to stop Hezbollah from reconstituting itself as a military force. Fine. But really, to your mind, Michael, is a ceasefire vis-a-vis Israel and Lebanon failing, eroding, call it what you will, or is this what the ceasefire was always going to look like?
I think this is what the ceasefire was always going to look like, and that makes it pretty tenuous. I've been describing the ceasefire in Lebanon, and frankly, the ceasefire in Gaza over the past couple of weeks, as legal fictions. Neither is an actual ceasefire. But everybody agrees to still call it a ceasefire. So, as long as both sides agree to call it a ceasefire, then it's a ceasefire. It's hard to describe Lebanon in particular as a ceasefire, given, as you note, just the pace of Israeli strikes, the fact that Hezbollah seems to be doing everything they can to reconstitute themselves in southern Lebanon in areas they're not supposed to be, seems to be doing everything they can to try and rearm. That shouldn't surprise anybody, and it shouldn't surprise anybody that Israel is continuing to strike at them. I think the problem here is that we always had this mismatch of expectations, where when Israel hears Hezbollah is going to disarm, the Israeli time frame is much shorter than the Lebanese time frame, and maybe even than the American time frame was. And Israel is simply willing to go in and strike whatever it deems necessary without real regard to any of the political dynamics. Now, that's not to say that Hezbollah is actually disarming or the Lebanese government and the left are doing a successful job. From everyone I talk to, it seems like they're trying, and there are certainly examples of the government and the LAF getting Hezbollah to lay down some arms, but it's like negotiated. So obviously not fast enough for the Israelis, and so is the ceasefire going to last another year? We're going to be sitting here on the second anniversary talking about an actual ceasefire. The pace things are going, that would surprise me.
So just for our listeners and viewers, the LAF is the Lebanese Armed Forces. Obviously, should be the operational arm of the Lebanese government to go and disarm Hezbollah. But as you mentioned, I think definitely in recent months, their actions vis-a-vis Hezbollah are a lot less than definitely what Israel would like to see, and arguably less than what the U.S. side would also want to see. And there's obviously this, at least a tripartite kind of commission that was set up by the ceasefire deal to monitor the ceasefire and to ensure Hezbollah disarms. So I think it's fair to say that the U.S. at least gave Israel a yellow light for the targeted strike in Beirut on Sunday. Otherwise, like with these things, as we've talked about before, hard to believe Bibi Netanyahu would go and do this in the face of Donald Trump's opposition to it. But legal fiction, it's a nice it's a nice turn of phrase. The fighting is definitely less than what it was before these deals, and we'll get to Gaza in a second, trust me. But definitely the firing has not ceased. So the question is, I think, and you kind of alluded to it, can the Lebanese government, can the Lebanese military actually go and disarm Hezbollah? Because Hezbollah has threatened civil war effectively if they try to go and take their arms by force. And this is a basic wager of the deal, is it not?
For sure. It is a basic wager of the deal. But I think that, we're seeing here, and pretty much in every other arena, Israel has military solutions to everything. And in many of these arenas, they're good ones, right? We've seen that demonstrated now, over the course of the last 2.5 years in all sorts of impressive and unbelievable ways. But ultimately, the wager with Lebanon was that there could be a political process, because that's really the only way to disarm Hezbollah. I don't think anybody would have claimed on the day of the ceasefire a year ago that the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army had the capability to go in there and, capability / willingness to go in there and completely disarm Hezbollah by force. So, in some ways, I think Israel was accepting the basic premise that there'd have to be some time and some political process. Now, maybe they were willing to let that play out for, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it was. The pace of Israeli strikes certainly has stepped up. And so I think the question is, really two questions. One question is whether Israel has decided that its calculus has changed, that it's going to give up on the prospect of any political process doing this, and they're going to now really double down on a military solution, basically until Hezbollah is forced to say that the ceasefire no longer exists, because they can't maintain the legal fiction any longer in the face of continuing Israeli strikes. That's question one. And question two is, to what extent Israel is identifying Hezbollah's current capabilities as a proximate threat, because certainly Hezbollah is trying to disarm. I think the question is whether... trying to rearm.
Rearm, yeah.
Trying to rearm. I think the question is whether that effort has been, in Israel's eyes, so successful that it necessitates the stepped-up military action to the point where maybe it's even worth risking the end of the ceasefire in Israeli eyes. I don't have definitive answers to either of those two questions, but it seems to me that the answers to those two questions should dictate what we're going to see next.
So you beat me to the punch, because, there are a few threads to pull on here. For now, at least, and really over the past year, the continued Israeli military strikes have been cost-free, because Hezbollah, save for I think one instance way back, I think December, January of this past year, has not responded at all, and they have yet to respond to this like I said, fairly dramatic strike in the heart of the Dahia district in southern Beirut, the stronghold of Hezbollah, take out the senior commander. They haven't responded, which again, like you said, 2.5 years ago, this would have been science fiction, right? This strike alone, let alone every other strike on a near daily basis, would have been probably a full-scale war, given what we believed Hezbollah was capable of prior to, October 7th.
Also, by the way, I read yesterday, which was just fascinating, that the guy who was just assassinated refused to give up his cell phone, or using his cell phone. His attitude was like, "Oh, the Israelis aren't gonna, the Israelis aren't gonna make me change my behavior," which seems to have been a mistake.
Well, it's hard to believe, but I suppose it is believable, given given the decision making. Right. At the top of the Hezbollah organization, definitely since October 7th, 2023. But I think my point is, for Israel, it's been cost free. But at a certain point, do you expect Hezbollah to respond? I mean, that's the real question.
I do. I don't see how they can keep on sustaining this without any response. So maybe the response is resumed rocket fire to the extent they're capable on northern Israel. My guess is that the likelier response is something overseas, since that's harder for Israel to prevent. And it seems, we've seen that in the past from Hezbollah. I mean, literally dating back decades. Right. So it's a combination of their MO and probably where Israel is the weakest, because, obviously harder to guard targets outside of your borders and thousands of miles outside of your borders than within. And they might also gamble that doing that won't prompt Israel to end the ceasefire in full force, whereas I think rockets on northern Israel would prompt, a furious response from the Israeli Air Force. But I don't see how Hezbollah can keep on sustaining these types of blows without trying to respond in some way, shape, or form. I certainly hope they don't, but that doesn't seem realistic to me.
Yeah. On this side too, there's even before Sunday's strike in Beirut, there was the mood music on this end was we may be headed to at least a multi-day escalation with Hezbollah, given the increased pace of Israeli strikes, like I said, against Hezbollah assets, southern Lebanon, eastern Lebanon, on a near daily basis. Probably still true, but we haven't seen it yet. By the way, you said something that intrigued me, Michael. A military solution, you called it, versus, let's say, the political track of, ideally Hezbollah will voluntarily or via coordination with the Lebanese government deign to put down its arms as the ceasefire deal demanded, at least in southern Lebanon and, north of the Litani River, maybe. But you yourself have written that Israel may be too beholden, or at least this Israeli government may be too beholden to view everything through a military lens, that a political and diplomatic approach may be more beneficial to Israel in this kind of, I don't want to say post-war era, because I don't know, I'm not entirely convinced the war has ended on any front, but at least in this very different post-October 7th era. Yeah.
Listen, I think that what I see coming from the Israeli government is always, and it's not just the past 2 years, this is kind of a long-running theme. It's always the short term versus the long term, right? So it's assessing the immediate short-term threats, which almost by definition have to be tackled through military solutions, versus thinking about how you mitigate the long-term threat, which almost always has to involve some sort of political aspect. And particularly since October 7th, Israel seems even less willing than usual to think about the ways in which there have to be long-term political solutions. So, there's of course the perpetual example of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, but let's leave that aside for a moment. We just think about dealing with these armed terrorist groups and militias, and look at how DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and rehabilitation efforts worked around the world in other conflicts. I don't know that there's any that had a purely military solution. People like to cite Northern Ireland all the time as kind of the example that seems to have the most similarities to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the IRA ended up disarming through a combination of real military pressure and intelligence penetration from the British Armed Forces and the Northern Ireland Police. By the way, if people haven't read the book Say Nothing, absolutely go out and read it. It's
fantastic book.
Yeah, one of the best books I've ever read. And it's on the Northern Ireland conflict, but it actually sort of details it. Actually, it's funny. It actually doesn't really get so much to the political part of it, but it really details all the ways in which the British had just thoroughly penetrated the IRA in lots of ways. But the point is that then the process of getting the IRA to put its weapons down, it wasn't just about the military and intelligence successes. It was then a more drawn out political process where you had to give them other incentives and do it in stages, and it's not going to happen overnight. Now, I think in lots of ways, Hezbollah is much scarier, far more capable. I think probably more ideologically radical, even, although I don't know, maybe not. But the point is that there has to be some space for the political aspect of this to succeed. And maybe in the end it won't. Maybe the Lebanese government and the LAF just don't have the will, the capability, the backing to do this. But it seems to me that it's worth giving it a shot, especially given how much Hezbollah has been degraded militarily by the IDF. And it's also worth giving it a shot because the Lebanese government and the LAF, they don't like Hezbollah. They're not sympathetic to them. They want their power to be minimized, and they want them deterred. So again, to put all the eggs in that basket, that to me would be a mistake. And to just assume that the Lebanese government and the LAF, after frankly years, if not decades, of failure to really do this, will be able to do it on their own with no problems. I think that's a myopic assumption. But you got to give them a chance, especially now when Hezbollah is at its weakest point, because otherwise we absolutely will be sitting here, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, still talking about how you deal with Hezbollah.
Yeah. Look, the dirty, unspoken secret, at least publicly, is that maybe the Lebanese government and the LAF are very happy to have the Israeli Air Force do the dirty work for them.
Yeah, they probably are.
Nobody will admit that. The official line out of Beirut is, Israel needs to stop violating the ceasefire, and there's this kind of circular chicken or the egg logic where, Israel still has 5 outposts inside southern Lebanon, so if Israel withdraws, then maybe Hezbollah will disarm. Obviously, Israel does not want to withdraw until Hezbollah disarms, so that's likely, those outposts will be there for a long time yet. By the way, final point on Lebanon via Belfast and Say Nothing, fantastic book by Patrick Radden-Keefe. My favorite data point in that entire book was the fact that the Northern Irish police and British intelligence services had their own Fauda undercover units running around Northern Ireland in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Which, I read that and I was like, well, maybe they were trained by the Israelis. We have to ask Avi Sakharov about the Northern Irish Fauda. Maybe there's a spin-off potential there. All kidding aside, let's move on to our next topic, and it's a big one for many people. Gaza. Ceasefire deal is now over a month old. Most of the hostages have thankfully been returned, save for 2 deceased hostages, after one was just repatriated or is in the process of being repatriated as we record.
Do we know which of the 3?
No, we don't. Not yet. No. And there's 2 Israeli nationals and 1 Thai national still there, so we don't know who it is necessarily, but I imagine by the time this podcast goes up, we should know, or our listeners should know, not us in the current moment as we record. But similar to Lebanon, even over the past month plus, we've seen sporadic escalations of fire between Israel and Hamas. I don't want to say on a daily basis, but maybe on every other day basis. And maybe most worrying of all, there seems to be very little movement so far towards the so-called second phase of the ceasefire deal. This despite last week's interesting, important, call it what you will, UN Security Council resolution calling for the deployment of this international peacekeeping force, this international stabilization force to Gaza. So, I mean, big picture, what's your sense regarding the state of play of this ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza?
I mean, here I think everything is just stuck now. In terms of the transition from phase 1 to phase 2. I do think that to the extent that this is actually a ceasefire, I do think that this one probably will hold in its current pattern for a while, just because I don't know that Hamas really has any options to violate it in a way that will lead the entire thing to break down. But maybe even more crucially, the United States is literally sitting there in a warehouse in Kiryat Gat, kind of, whether it's calling balls and strikes or to some extent actually determining what Israel can and cannot do. Who knows for sure? But here, I mean, you literally have minute by minute U.S. involvement in a way that I'm not sure exists to quite the same extent on the Lebanese front. And I also think that because of the prominence of the 20-point plan for President Trump and now the Security Council resolution, it doesn't seem to me that he's going to be willing to let this one completely devolve back into, chaos, war, no ceasefire on the horizon. So I think that this one probably holds, but again, to what extent is this actually a ceasefire? And it's, where we get into the transition that things are obviously the most complicated. I mean, you referenced the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. Mm-hmm. that thing is not being created anytime soon. It's just not. We now even have the reports of countries that were willing to contribute, like Azerbaijan, now changing their minds. And we're still kind of where we were before, which is, the Turks are champing at the bit. They go in there in a second, but obviously the Israelis are never going to let them. And who else is going to contribute to this thing? I just don't see how it happens. And final point on this, which is me just being a broken record in every single medium, until Israel and then the United States acknowledges that there has to be some sort of Palestinian Authority role here, because that is a way of starting to break the logjam in all sorts of ways, in terms of building a security force and also in terms of getting other countries to agree to contribute to different things and pitch in different ways. Then this is, I think, going to remain completely stuck. I don't see another way out. I don't know, Neri, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't see it.
No, I don't see it either. The PA, there's not endless numbers of actors, as we've discussed on this podcast for the better part of 2 years, that are willing to go in and do the real work necessary on the ground inside Gaza. To kind of stabilize the situation, or at least try to move it into a better situation. Even if the Azeris and the Indonesians and whoever were willing to deploy forces, how effective are those forces going to be? They're just going to sit there, I assume, and monitor whatever Israel and Hamas feel like they want to do. I don't think they're going to have real force on the ground. And the real problem, I think, you said the situation's stuck. Without the ISF, it's unclear to me how we can move to any future stage of what the plan actually calls for. Further Israeli withdrawals, some kind of start of reconstruction, even the governance aspect of the Board of Peace overseeing everything, led by Donald Trump, nominally at least, but really the technocratic committee that's supposed to run Gaza on a day-to-day basis. It's supposed to be tied into the ISF. And by the way, the Technocratic Committee itself, we've been hearing for weeks now that they were very, very close to figuring out the names and the personalities of some 15 people who are supposed to man this body. That hasn't happened either.
And let's not forget, there were names floated. It was supposed, allegedly was going to be headed by the PA health minister, and that got vetoed because PA. So, I don't know. I don't know what plan B is.
Yeah. So, again, regardless of what actually happened or which name did or did not get floated, it still has not been created, right? The Board of Peace, this very ambitious kind of international oversight body has yet to be named. ISF, despite the UN Security Council resolution last week, has yet to be formed or even commitments made. So I think that's the real issue, and it's unclear to me where we go if there's no movement. I guess the IDF will still hold half of Gaza, and Hamas will hold the rest of it, and there will be sporadic escalations. I mean, maybe that's not necessarily a bad result. I mean, bad for, I think, Gaza and the people of Gaza. But it was like the report a few days ago, I'm sure you saw it, when there was one of these kind of more significant escalations. Anonymous report in the Arab media, which, take it for what it is, that Hamas is no longer beholden to the ceasefire. And I saw that, I say, okay, even if that were true, and I didn't even believe it to be true, even if that were true, what does that mean?
Right. What would they do about it?
What would they do? It's not like they can keep, start firing rockets at Tel Aviv again. They don't hold any hostages, really. They, after today, they'll hold 2 deceased hostages. So that leverage is gone. So I don't quite know what the meaning is of Hamas no longer being beholden to the ceasefire actually implies.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, and especially when they're still taking pot shots at the IDF with however many fighters are left in the tunnel or tunnels in Rafah, and they're still kind of testing and probing the yellow line. That seems to, I hope I'm not horribly wrong about this, but that seems to me to be the extent of what they can do at the moment. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't know what it would mean for them to break the ceasefire, which is why I think that this one will be more stable than the one on the northern border.
Very interesting. And just the final question with regard to Gaza, is there a scenario where the Trump administration just gets fed up, tired, distracted
Sure.
with the whole Gaza? I mean, I'm reading, my colleagues that deal with Europe and specifically Ukraine, Russia. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are now negotiating a deal on that front. So how much bandwidth do they actually have?
Sure. Although it seems as if Marco Rubio and Dan Driscoll have been brought in to perhaps follow up, to be polite, on what Witkoff and Kushner did. So maybe Witkoff and Kushner now have more time to turn their attention back to Gaza. I don't know. On the one hand, we've seen President Trump get bored or frustrated with other conflicts, including Russia-Ukraine, right? He's publicly thrown his hands up a bunch of times and effectively said, "All right, that I'm out," which hasn't proven to hold. He seems to have the same draw to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that pretty much every one of his predecessors since 1948 has had, where it's very difficult. Maybe not all, maybe not Eisenhower, but for the most part, very, very difficult for most of them to just set it aside and ignore it. So he does definitely seem to be in that mold. And then there's also the fact that my country here may be at war with Venezuela at some point soon, given the military buildup in the southern hemisphere. Kind of reminds me when the United States was sending all sorts of stuff to the Middle East, 6 months ago and 8 months ago, and then all of a sudden we saw military activity in Iran. I mean, I don't know why all this stuff would be going on if the U.S. wasn't going to use it. So that might end up being a giant distraction that pulls him away from this too. Who knows? But even if he stays as invested, mentally, emotionally as he is in this, again, hard to see how this really has any movement without changing the basic equation in an important way, which involves the Palestinian Authority, whether anybody likes it or not.
Yeah, and anybody, meaning this Israeli government, remains to be seen. Yeah. Final topic, the big news from last week, closer to your neck of the woods, was a visit to D.C. by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to meet with President Trump. We had a great webinar last week on this topic, hosted by our colleague Rachel Brandenburg, and featuring our good friends Ambassador Michael Ratney and Aziz Al-Gashian. But I'm curious to get your own take, Michael, about what this visit may have meant for U.S.-Saudi relations, and really the prospects of Israeli-Saudi normalization. What do you think? What were your big takeaways from last week in the White House?
My biggest takeaway is that we're just seeing the Israelis get cut out of this in real time. It's always been clear that for the Saudis, Israel normalization was not about Israel. That was just secondary. It was about what they were going to get from the U.S. And up until now, they weren't really able to get those things from the United States without the Israel normalization part. And now they are getting them. It's hard to know exactly what they got. I literally laughed out loud during the webinar last week when Ambassador Ratney expressed his frustration now as a civilian of seeing a fact sheet without knowing what's actually real and what's behind it. I share that frustration. I've always had it, but probably worse for him since he's not used to being in that position. So hard to know exactly what the United States is giving to the Saudis. But the point is, MBS came here. He knew he wasn't going to walk out of here with a defense treaty, but he walked out of here with a pledge to get F-35s, a pledge from President Trump to give him the same F-35s as the U.S. gives the Israelis. Now, it won't be the same because Israel modifies them. And so, Israel has the F-35 Adir, which is an Israeli model with Israeli tech. Obviously, the Saudis can't get that, but it seems as if they might get the same base model. Walked out of here with the designation as a major non-NATO U.S. ally. Mm-hmm. So, defense treaty, even if President Trump had wanted to give the Saudis a defense treaty, he would have to pass the Senate, and we know what the math is on there. It's just not close. But previously, all of these things were supposed to be conditional on normalization with Israel, and now they're just not. This is sort of the new precedent. So that doesn't mean that normalization won't happen. I still expect at some point that it will, but the idea that all of these things hinge on Israeli say-so or an Israeli veto, that's completely out the window. And I think it just exposes, we've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu and others and folks in the United States talk very confidently about how Saudi normalization is going to happen, within a year, and don't pay attention to anything the Saudis say in public. They don't really mean it. Well, I think it's pretty clear after this that the Saudis do mean it. And again, normalization, I still firmly believe will happen, but it's not around the corner by any means. And I also don't think it's just a function of Netanyahu not being willing to say the magic words of Palestinian statehood or credible pathway or whatever it is the Saudis want. I'm also pretty fairly convinced that the Saudis aren't going to do it while you have Israeli troops operating in still half of Gaza. And that in some ways is even harder because, you could have Prime Minister, I don't know, take your pick, Naftali Bennett, Gadi Eisenkot, Yair Golan, Yair Lapid, whoever. You could have them be Prime Minister a year from now and say whatever, magic words are required. That might be easier for them than withdrawing the IDF from 53% of Gaza. And so I think normalization is so much harder now than it was before. We saw that in all sorts of ways last week.
So all roads do not lead through Jerusalem to get to Washington.
Seemingly not.
No, it's a shift. It's definitely a shift. I think it shows the change in how Israel is perceived. By the way, not just in the Arab world, arguably, but also in America, where normalization with Israel was the kind of baseline for all of these things, and now, like you said, Israel has been cut out. When you were talking about F-35s, I thought you were going to say Trump promised MBS the same F-35s that he promised the Emiratis back during the Abraham Accords, which obviously never materialized.
I suspect the Saudis, though, are going to follow up on this more than the Emiratis did. I think MBS probably wants these more.
Probably. And, I'll just give you how it was viewed on this end. Yes, there was a lot of criticism of the government in like you said, being cut out of this deal, which should have had a this third leg, the Israeli kind of normalization component. So there was some criticism of that, but it did not deflate the pro-Netanyahu media ecosystem they're still promising normalization with Saudi in the coming year, maybe even before the next Israeli election. So that's still kind of in the ether. Although, like you said, I agree with you. I don't think it's credible. And in terms of the qualitative military edge, yeah, there was the usual concern, alarm being reported from inside the Israeli defense establishment, which again, legitimate. But I'm old enough to have actually reported the same concerns back in, 2020, when the Abraham Accords were signed. Yes.
And listen, I'm not expert enough in the actual defense tech issues to be able to say whether the Saudis potentially getting F-35s 6 years, 8 years from now will impact Israel's QME. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the fact that it's just the fact that we know the IDF formally objected and submitted a paper to the prime minister objecting to the sale, and the fact that Trump publicly waved it off, said, "Oh well, the Israelis don't like this, but I don't really care. I'm going to do it anyway." Even if it doesn't impact Israel's QME in real life, the perception, in some ways, is almost as important, right? The perception in the region that the United States is just willing to wave off Israeli concerns, that's important too, even if the actual technical aspects of this don't erode QME.
Yeah, QME, qualitative military edge. The U.S. By law is committed to uphold Israel's qualitative military edge across the Middle East. So in the past, when big weapon systems have been provided to this or that Arab state, the U.S. has gone and compensated Israel, shall we say, for it in some way. Unclear if that's going to happen this time around. I think, like we just said, I think the politics and the focus in Washington has shifted, shall we say? I think. Yeah. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. This would have been a bigger political issue on Capitol Hill. A couple of years ago.
Yes, it would have been much bigger a couple of years ago. It would have been bigger on both sides of it, right? It would have been bigger because of the way the Saudis were viewed versus the way they're viewed now. And it would have been bigger because of the way Israel is viewed versus the way it's viewed now. And it's just impossible to argue that this is somehow trending in Israel's direction and that none of this matters.
Yeah, it matters significantly. We'll see where it goes. Michael, this was always going to be an abridged recording session, so we could have gone for another 30 minutes talking about these and many other topics, but to be continued. Maybe next time we'll invite Shira. What do you think?
Maybe. Well, we'll have to think about it
if she's available. Exactly. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too.
And we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Neri.
Shalom and welcome to Israel Policy Pod. I'm your host, Shanie Reichman, the director of IPF Atid and of strategic initiatives here at Israel Policy Forum. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Matan Sivek, who co-founded the Hostages and Missing Families Forum in DC with his wife, Bar Ben Yaakov. They've done a tremendous amount of work to secure the release of the hostages from Hamas captivity. Welcome, Matan.
Thank you, Shanie, for having me.
So why don't you start off with how you ended up in this role? You were a student at Columbia University, getting your master's there, and then what happened?
So actually, we were a group of students, Israeli students at Columbia University, and October 7 happened, and we were, of course, bewildered, like all of us. We just wanted to be helpful, and the environment on campus was just like shifted in a day. And from a very casual, nice place that we all love to go to, it became an extremely toxic environment, let's put it this way, where we felt very uncomfortable right away. And after, 2 days after October 7, we received a phone call from a friend from Israel who shared with us that there are 700 and something missing people that we don't know where they are. And he mentioned that they're establishing the Hostage and Missing Families Forum in Israel, still not knowing what exactly it's going to look like or what they're going to do. But he asked if we might be helpful and arrange something in the US because they might come to the US as well. And we were like, yeah, we want to be helpful. And what we did is that I was living back then with my wife, Bar, here in DC, and I was splitting my time between New York and DC. So we said, okay, we will arrange something in DC. Our friends will arrange something in New York, but we thought it will be a very, very fast sprint, that in 2 weeks from now, it will be over and we won't need to do anything. So this was the initial plan. And this is how it all started, and here we are.
2 years later.
2 years later, we're just, we still have 3 hostages to bring back home, but the fact that the living hostages are out is just, we have never dreamt that this day will come. It's really unbelievable that it happened. So yeah, so it was not a fast sprint. It was a very long marathon.
Yeah. As the folks running the hostage forum in Washington, D.C., as opposed to the New York one, you were interfacing a lot with the U.S. government. So you worked first with the Biden administration and then with the Trump administration. Can you reflect a little bit on that? Maybe compare the two to some extent, give some insights on how things moved.
Right. I will share a little bit about our work in general, so
Yeah.
people can understand, what we focused on, and there was also a big difference between our work in New York and DC. So in general, we really wanted to make sure, or the main goal of our operation is to ensure that no one forgets about the hostages that cannot express their voice. They're stuck in dark tunnels and they're voiceless. And we were their voice. And the idea by establishing this operation was to provide the most effective platform for hostage families to advocate for their loved ones. And this is what we did. And it required really to include everyone. So we worked top down and bottom up. And when I say bottom up, I mean a lot of grassroots work. So, for example, in New York, it was led by Dana and Shanie and Omer. They really built an incredible community, a very big one, substantial, that supported on a weekly basis the hostage families in many different ways, by the way, not necessarily the rallies in Central Park, but in many different ways. And from the grassroots work with different communities, it led us to work a lot with the media to make sure that we're included in the news span and in the news cycle. And it's very hard to compete with all the breaking news all the time. And we had to work with the international community, so people understand that this issue is not related just to Israel. It encompasses 40 countries, people from all around the world, and they had to understand that they have some sort of responsibility. So we worked a lot with the UN and different embassies. We worked closely with different think tanks that are shaping policies and public opinions for them to educate them about what's happening in Gaza and what's happening to hostage families and hostages in general. And then it led us to work with the top tier, which is Congress and administration. Again, we mainly focus on educating senior public officials, ensuring that they have all the information that they need in order to first focus on this topic and understand that this is a pressing issue. And second, to understand what didn't work so far and what we can learn from it. And again, the hostage families or former hostages, they're no politicians. They're not shaping any policy, but but like humanizing them and seeing those faces outside of the poster um, changed everything for people. They became much more committed to this cause. So this is in general what we did with both administration, with the same strategy. Some people claim that strategies shifted. We had the same strategy. We worked with everybody, and we were, from time to time, we were criticized for doing that, for working with the entire spectrum, because we needed all hands on deck, and people had to understand that, and it bothered some people, but we had to keep going. So
I'll just note, I'm
yeah,
now
of course,
remembering at the
yeah.
DNC in Chicago, there was controversy
Right.
because hostage families were meeting with anti-Israel protesters, even, which is right, meaning obviously for the same purpose, which is reminding them about the hostages, because there was no discrimination. Just everybody who we can talk to about this needs to know and needs to be thinking about it. And then, of course,
People were mad, right? People were mad that we met with the squad, for example. Okay, that hostage families met with the squad. I found it surprising because they have a very big audience that needs to know better about what happened on October 7th, and I felt it at Columbia University that people are just like, they're ignorant about this topic. They just don't know. And we were well received by most figures. And if you're asking, I'm taking this to your question about working with both administrations. I think that it shows, it really speaks volume about the agility of the families and their laser focus, purposeful mission. They knew what they want. They knew what they win. They just focused on that, and people, it resonated with them. They understand that they don't want to, once you bring back their loved ones, they're gone. While this issue was politicized in Israel in many different ways, and I understand, and I can understand why. It's just that here, this is our battle as well, to make sure that Republicans and Democrats, they can work together on releasing the hostages, and there is a big difference between the two. And I think that there are only maybe like one or two topics that they can agree upon. These days, it's really hard to find those shared goals that they can gather around. I cannot even think of one at the moment except for the hostages, but we're in a very paralyzing days. So so we worked with both.
Yeah. And while you didn't shift your strategy at all, was there anything that did evolve in how you were doing your work over the course of the years? Not necessarily based on Trump or Biden, but maybe based on what's happening on the ground in Israel.
Okay. Yeah, it's a big question. And of course, the answer is yes. From tactics perspective, we changed many things. First, and I have to tell you that it was a huge shift in our operation, the fact that hostages came back home. Hostages started advocating for their kind of captivity, colleagues, or the people that they were with in captivity,
Yeah.
And it was huge because you could hear firsthand for someone who experienced that. I also think that, for us, or for me, it's important to underscore that the arena in Israel and arena in the US, there are different arenas. What happened in Israel, could have been valuable for the operation and the efforts and the advocacy, but it it wouldn't necessarily work here in the United States. And this is why we kept we kept working with everybody. We didn't ban anyone, and I think that it was very, very, very important for this cause. And definitely when the Trump administration stepped into office and into power, and you could see the change within the dynamic between Israel and the United States. It also changed a lot for us operationally, in a way, tactically, because they work differently. They work like in a different way than the Biden administration. And here I would like to underscore two main things that we noticed that are different between the two. So the first, in the first year of this struggle, the Biden administration was extremely supportive for releasing the hostages, and was extremely supportive of Israel as well, in my opinion. However, they decided strategically to focus on the American hostages as a tool or as a leverage to release all hostages. This was their strategy. So when they were meeting with hostage families, they met mostly with the 13 American families. This was very different from the Trump administration. Okay, the Trump administration had a complete different approach that we supported, by the way. We tried to share with the Biden administration, and we kept saying that it will be important to incorporate all hostage families in their efforts. For some reason, it didn't work out, but I know that they tried to do their best. And as you could see, the first deal that was executed when President Trump was elected, it was structured by the Biden administration and implemented by kind of like, to be honest, by both administrations. The change of government was important for this push, but it was an amazing show of bipartisanship. In January 2025. This is the first point that I wanted to underscore. The second that you learn with time is that the Trump administration, they are very, very result oriented. They focus less on the process, and they welcome ideas that could turn things upside down. Okay, so you can think more creatively about how to solve different issues. With emergency cases, sometimes it works better. So the Biden administration, when we were working with them, and again, I'm very appreciative of all their work because I think that they've done amazing work, and they really did the best they could, and they all the time focused on the processes that will lead you to the outcome, and they had very organized processes that are extremely important for government and best practices of government. But with this emergency case that people can die any moment, I think that it was also valuable to have different senior public officials who can, kind of like bring a different perspective that is not necessarily the natural way of thinking for government officials. This is the two points that I think that people it will be interesting for people to understand, and that we noticed throughout our work.
Mm-hmm. It's sometimes hard to see the clear line between activism and how it leads to actual policy implementation. I think that the hostage forum was like a very obvious example of seeing the policies change and be implemented and move as such a direct line to the activism you guys were doing. Can you speak a little more about that and what you think was most effective? Because to me,
Definitely.
I remember hearing Trump reference in Tel Aviv people holding signs with his name on it, for example. And I've just seen throughout the war, Joe Biden and Donald Trump know that regardless of what they're hearing from different government officials in Israel, they know that the people are on their side and are pushing for this. And I think that made a huge difference.
Definitely. Okay, I will get to the signs, like Trump signs in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
But first, I wanted to emphasize one point that I think that was for us, it was crucial to convey throughout this work, especially, by the way, with the Republican administration. So there was this thought that we all had at the beginning that the hostages will be rescued by the IDF
In the
or
beginning of the war.
at the beginning of the war, and also later on, and I will explain. But when we started when we started volunteering and establishing um, this entity, so we thought that what will happen is that the IDF will go to Gaza and will rescue the hostages. They will come back in 2 weeks, and that's it. Like done deal. Like we didn't think of any other scenario. Um, so when we realized that it's not going to happen, we kept hearing voices from many different directions that were supportive of this approach, that IDF should go and rescue. And we tried along the way to explain or educate about this, that it's very risky for the soldiers to do that. We started hearing from former hostages that people cannot be rescued from the tunnels. It just like unattainable. It's not something that they can do because they sleep next to mines. They sleep next to weapons. They everything is explosive there. And Hamas terrorists, they got the order that if IDF is approaching a tunnel, they should kill the hostages. So we were, to be honest, very concerned about that. And what
And
changed
then we have the
everything.
story of we also saw hostages accidentally being killed by the IDF as well.
Correct. So before that, just before that, we had a rescue of actually the IDF rescued 8 people out of 255, like 251 who were kidnapped on October 7th and 4 who were already there. So they rescued 8 people, and then one of them is Noah Argamani. We had Andrei Kozlov, several of them, and a month, I think, or 2 months later, we had the terrible, most horrifying incident of the murder of the beautiful 6, as we call them, Hirsch, Carmel, Almog, Ori Danino, Eden Yerushalmi, and Alex. And it showed that this is like trying to rescue hostages from tunnels. It's not a solution that we should pursue. And I'm telling you, there was a big fight around it. People kept suggesting it because it's easier to suggest that. Okay, you send troops, you tell them go to rescue. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work. But we lost soldiers as well through those operations, like Arnon Zmora. So we had to work diligently with the administration and different stakeholders, also think tanks, Congress members, just to tell them that it's not going to happen. And we got a lot of pushback about that. And then people started saying that again, the hostage families, they hold toxic conversations with the senior officials because they're not supportive of rescue operations. And it's not about not being supportive of rescue operations. It's about being supportive of saving the lives of the people who are in the tunnels and the soldiers. So this was a huge fight. And when that, by the way, when the Trump administration took office, we had to restart these conversations because think about it, like totally different people. No one worked with the Biden administration like almost no one, um, like very few, and they were also replaced. So we had to restart everything. So I think it was also a bit frustrating for the families. They were very tired. They didn't know what's happening. But thank God, when Trump was elected, we could see hostages coming back home
You've
through a
spoken
deal,
a lot
through a negotiated deal. Yeah.
through a negotiated deal. There's a huge difference actually between the way your activism worked in America in general versus in Israel. Is there any
Right.
color you can paint to that? Did you guys do any work in Israel too? How did it look when Israeli officials came to America? What role did you play in any of that?
As I shared with you, we work with everybody. Okay, it's important to
Yeah.
say our strategy from the beginning. After actually, it's not like from day one, but let's say after a month, we realized that salvation will come from the U.S. and not from Israel. This is the reality, and it was hard reality for me as an Israeli. But I knew that if the hostages will be released, it will be uh, initiated by the U.S. and already after the first month we could say that. So we were extremely adamant about working here and focusing on what's happening here because we felt that again the work in Israel was extremely important, but it was a very different work and there were different people to do that. So we didn't meddle in anything that is related to Israel. And also, by the way, with the government, we did work in collaboration with the embassy here, for example, that they were some sort of like a liaison or like the contact person for us. But, hostage families, they joined the prime minister in his visits. We met with some ministers who visited here, like visited DC, but it was really not our focus, to be honest. So I will stop there.
Yeah. Can you just say a word about the moment when you found out the final living hostages were going to be returning home? I think it happened in your kitchen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So actually, I would love to talk about this moment because it was so precious. Uh, I will tell you the entire story. So it all started after a huge frustration that we had in last August about a deal that was about to be reached and unfortunately collapsed eventually. I think that we all felt, frustration is a very nice word to describe it, but we didn't know what to do anymore. We were like, we, we all stakeholders want it. Um, different, even Hamas by the media, like it was like they mentioned that they want it. We had no contact, of course, with Hamas, but the media shared it. Uh, and still it didn't work. So we were thinking of like what we should do. And we were approaching October 7, the second anniversary of October 7. And we thought that it would be valuable to do something that will resonate with people and that we can invite the stakeholders that we've been working on in the past 2 years. So we came up with the idea to have the Sukkah of Hope, a place where hostage families could host all the people they worked with and to thank them for their effort. At the end of these 2 days, the Sukkah of Hope event, we were actually practicing. We had a small side event to practice yoga for Carmel Gat, who was assassinated by Hamas because she was a yoga instructor. And we all set our intention for the release of the hostages. And it was really unique because all families practiced and they were part of it. They decided that they will join the class. And we talked about releasing the hostages, and exactly at 6 p.m., right after the class ended, we received a numerous, like really, like it was unbelievable. We received so many messages and calls about the fact that a deal is going to be reached very soon. They were so happy, all of them. We have photos that we can show from those moments that when they discovered the news, but they were extremely just like hopeful, and they could smile. You could see Arbel Yahud, who was in solitary for uh, you know I don't know, endless time. Like it's just like she was in solitary for like hundreds of days, smiling, happy. Um, it was also a bit challenging because some of the families, uh, their loved ones are deceased, and they knew that they might not, get them first. Or one of them is Nadav Rodaev, who was with us, and his father was held in Gaza. And we were at my house, and what happened next is that Secretary Lutnick and his wife Alison, they entered the house. They wanted to celebrate with hostage families, and they brought two champagnes with them, and we actually celebrated with them, and it was beautiful. And yet, one of the former hostages asked Secretary Lutnick if we can speak with the president to thank him for reaching a deal. And actually, Secretary Lutnick just called President Trump, and he was on the line after 3 seconds, maybe. Okay. So it was also really interesting to see the dynamic that, they're such close friends. He can reach out to him like very quickly. You don't need to go through all these, mediators. And President Trump, when he answered, he again was very kind to the families, and they all thanked him. And this is the video where all outlets kind of like picked up, because this was the first time when the world heard that the hostages will be out on Monday, not Saturday, not Sunday, but Monday. And this is why it was like important news for the world. And our kitchen became a little bit famous without knowing that this is like our kitchen. But actually, it's a great example, and I have to tell you, about, or a great reflection. It's a great reflection of our operation, because we're always there, and by design, you cannot see us. And it was so important that it will remain this way, that hostage families will be front and center, and the operation around them is around them and not front and center, and you don't need to know about us. But so I think that for me and Bar, my wife, I think that it was such an incredible closure.
Amazing. Do you want to take a minute to talk about what you're doing with your life now?
Yeah, thank you for asking.
And if you see it as a continuation of the work you've already been doing in some way?
Definitely. I think that everyone that dealt with the hostage case, that this was their life in a way, is dealing with the question, now what? Right? You wake up in the morning and you're like, okay. Also, by the way, former hostages, hostage families, they all ask, now what? They need to rebuild their life. And they're doing it. They're doing it, but it will take them time. And people need to understand that the rehabilitation process for them is a very long one. What they have been through, and we only witness what they've been through their interviews and what they tell. But there are many things that they don't tell. And for me, it was important to keep accompanying them and be part of their life in many ways, and say, okay, we were your platform for advocacy, but now we need to create a platform for rehabilitation as well, that will walk this path of life with you, and we'll make sure that, we might abandon you on October 7, but we we're here for you now that you're back. And also for the families who did not receive their loved ones, and the families who received their loved ones in coffins. And I think that they all need help, and people need to remember that it's not only the immediate family. We're talking about the extended family of every single family that really lost everything. Some of them, they were displaced. Okay, they lost their homes, they lost their communities. Some of them, they lost their jobs because they could not work. Some of them, most of them, they need to repurpose their life. And I'm very grateful that I will be continuing my professional journey with Israel. Israel is the largest humanitarian organization that in Israel, and also that was founded in Israel. The main idea of Israel at the beginning was to bring Israeli technologies to communities that went through different disasters and really help them to recover from first response to the rehabilitation process. So they could be there for years. In Sudan, they're there for 12 years already. So they wanted to focus on anywhere else beside the Middle East. But after October 7, and operating in 65 countries, they decided that it's too close to home and they need to operate in Israel. And now they had really a major role in rehabilitation of displaced communities in Israel. And I'm very grateful about the fact that they're now working on the rehabilitation of former hostages and hostage families together with an initiative that they established with former colleagues of mine from the Hostage Families Forum that is called 255 for the 255 hostages who were held in Gaza. And this will be the platform that will accompany families throughout their life. And I'm hopeful that people will still be supportive, that they will still ask for their well-being. And the idea is really to provide them with all services that they need, from like professional to psychological, mental health support, group retreats. So all this is 255. So one of the things that I'm going to do is to continue my work with hostage families, and I'm very grateful about. But in general, I'm really looking forward for Israel to expand and get even bigger, to become one of the leading humanitarian organizations that we could all count on, that will be a trustworthy one. And I think that in the atmosphere, the environment that we live in, and the discourse that we live in around the humanitarian sector, we notice that we're missing those kind of organizations. And I think that Israel will be an extremely relevant one. And this is why I decided to join to keep this good work.
Thank you so much, Matan. And I will name that amidst this war, it's been really hard for for Jews in general, all of us who are supportive of Israel, to find ways to be helpful in the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip when there is this lack of trust between our community and the humanitarian space. And Israel Aid has been one of the few places that is reliable, that we can count on to also work on reconstruction in Gaza, that we know is, sidelining Hamas and working with good actors. So that's also been good to hear. And I'm really happy to see that you're continuing your mission. Thanks for joining us.
And I really appreciate you providing me this space to talk about it. And I'm looking forward to further collaborations. And it's really great to speaking with you.
Okay, thanks again to Michael Koplow, Matan Sivek, and Shanie Reichman for their generous time and insights. Also, special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, our editor, Tracy Levy, and our assistant producer, Aiden Jesselson, as always, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum so it can keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening, and a happy and tasty Thanksgiving holiday for all those celebrating.